Why? Why is Maine ranked so close to last for its business environment? Why are we ranked near the bottom for education? And what about housing and energy prices? Why are they so high here? What is going on, and what might we do to change this downward spiral? My name is Jonathan Bush, and I am one of the many who are in on the secret that Maine is the greatest place to live and raise kids in the world. My family's been here for more than 100 years, and we're not going anywhere no matter what. But today's Mainers are forced to choose between Maine and the American dream. Maine For Keeps is an organization dedicated to the idea of the Maine dream, that Mainers can experience the American dream without having to leave Maine to do it. Maine For Keeps is a lot of things. It's a policy framework, a coalition of successful leaders ready to lean in on Maine, and it's a podcast telling the story as broadly as we can. Each week, we'll dive into these questions and more with exciting guests from every corner of our great state and nation. We'll talk about what works and what doesn't, what our leaders are doing and not doing that's making life harder and easier for Mainers. Our goal? Solutions to make Maine even better for families and businesses. So strap in and join us as we talk about creating a Maine For Keeps. Now, I know you weren't dating at the time, but is it fair to say that you met your wife in boys hockey?
It's fair to say that my wife is a much better athlete than I am.
She's a better athlete than most people alive.
She's a great athlete. We did grow up playing hockey, but my claim to fame is that her mother actually paid me to drive her and her prom date to prom. And I thought that was real cool because I was like driving the hot, cool chick to prom.
Wait a minute, was it cool or was it agony? Oh my God.
I mean, as a zit-faced nerd, like it was a privilege to drive the hot girl to prom. I was okay with that.
As another adult man who has to walk around Portland knowing that Luke Holden, the handsomest man in the world, is liable to come around the corner anytime, it is beautiful to think of you as a zit-faced, awkward man. That makes me so happy. Luke, you're not yet LL Bean, but Luke's Lobsters is a legendary Maine brand. But is it right? It was started in New York.
It was back in 2009 in the East Village.
Why New York? How did you get to? So you had a incredible career here at Cape, big star in a lot of ways. Georgetown, right? Huge school, hockey. Third generation lobster person. What got you to be not in Maine next?
Yeah, I'm a big Maine guy, right? So I grew up in Cape Elizabeth. My great grandfather lived up the hill from me, and everybody in between was living in town. So it's Cape Elizabeth and Maine has always been a great place and a great sense of community for me and my family, both when I look up to my grandparents and then for my kids today. And I needed to get out of the state. Bowdoin and Colby didn't let me in, even though I had some legacy.
Very, very, very big mistakes there.
Very competitive.
Bowdoin made the same mistake with me. We're never going to forgive them. I think we should agree.
They let my brother in, but he's a better version of me than I am for sure. But Georgetown, I did get a chance to go to Georgetown. I loved it down there. Majored in finance and small business. And after my junior year, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I followed all my friends to investment banking.
Follow the tribe, do the hours. Yeah.
It was easy. Like banks were hiring like crazy before the financial crisis. And I could make a good paycheck and go live in New York City. And that sounded fun and exciting. And that's what I signed up for. I really didn't know what the job entailed beyond that, and so that's what brought me to New York City.
Now, take me from Goldman's whatever, Lehman, Goldman, whatever, to Luke's Lobsters in downtown Manhattan. How do you? I mean, that's not your obvious next move.
No, so I did 3 years of investment banking. 2 years into it, um, I really just kind of got that entrepreneurial itch. It was, hey, this is a good job, maybe a great job, but there's just not a lot of passion in it for me. And so I started to build a business plan that basically answered the question of why there was no great, affordable Maine style lobster rolls in New York City. And I couldn't figure it out. It didn't make sense why there was a gap. So I started looking at real estate and found a lot of opportunity because this was the summer of 2009 when I was looking. So, a lot of destination.
They're shooting the wounded out there. Everything's available for nothing.
I went to a landlord and I had no savings, no operating experience, a half baked business plan. And he said, "What do you want to pay in rent? And how does a 1 month security deposit sound to you?" And I'm like, "Well, that's about 10% of my total budget. So let's give it a shot." And um, no guarantee on the lease. And honestly, the way that I attacked that first Luke's Lobster um, was I could basically pay the rent out of my investment banking salary if things didn't go right. And so I took a very risk adjusted approach where I found a partner to run the day to day of the business. I kept my investment banking job. And then dad and I co-funded that business for like 30,000 bucks. So I had $15,000 of savings. Dad borrowed 15,000 bucks against his 401k, which he didn't tell me about until 5 years later, where he came up with the money. Very indicative of who my dad is. He's just, for me and my two younger brothers, he's always just opened up every door of possibility he possibly could.
I was trying to creep around your dad's land and he caught me. He's like, "Let's go four-wheeling." Instead of yelling at me, I was like, "Yeah, let's go." And we got in his little red thing and we're banging around the woods. He's such a great dude. Jesus.
He is a great dude.
Could have gone the other way, catching me kind of creeping around his woods, just like, learning the neighborhood on the QT.
Well, the reality is that he was probably creeping around in his own woods and was just just stumbled into you. So it's
Playing with his machines. Absolutely.
yeah, two like-minded stumblers there.
So you exported a main thing. The arbitrage was, I'm not going to do a larger, a larger economy business in Maine. I'm going to do Maine and the larger economy.
That's it. I wanted to export the Maine experience. I wanted to share the Maine quality seafood and the quality level of hospitality with those stuck in a city like New York City. And that was really it. We were teaming up with dad. It was bring the very best quality product in the world at the very best price, and then treat people the way they want to be treated. And so like we had these two elements around people and product. And the last 15 years we haven't deviated around those commitments, and we've just been trying to figure out the process of growing a business.
And you grow, and obviously, long story short, New York works, economy bounces back, you start to expand. Is it about 10 years in that you actually get your first main location?
It's almost exactly 10 years. So, the other bit about growing in a recession is that you can get access to great human capital. And so I got really, really great people that are really the ones that are responsible for growing this business over the last 15 years. And they joined early, and we've been able to add throughout the last 15 years. But we didn't feel comfortable that there was a big enough market or a big enough opportunity for us to come home until like 2000 and this was like 2018, which is crazy. It was like close to 10 years after we opened up.
And I'm thinking, maybe, when did kids show up?
Kids, first one 2018, same year.
Yeah. So let's be honest. There was no business logic to go to Maine, but you're like, I'm not going to not raise my kids in Maine. That's the Maine superpower. You try to get out. The taxes are too high. The regs are too good. But it's like, I'm going to raise my kids here.
Married in 2017. So that's really when it all started.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That is Maine. You can't take that away from Maine. There's just no better community sense. I love it. And so you therefore, either amazingly your business plan came up with the fourth smallest state as the next place to go, or you had kids and said we got to raise them. But somehow, what's it like going into Portland? You've now been in a lot of cities, a lot of sort of tourist districts. You really are a kind of a, at least a brown belt at it at this point. Like, how does it go? What are the goods, the bads? What was it like?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because from like a labor law compliance standpoint, from a process at a city council for permits, like Portland bats around like a San Francisco or in New York City for like red tape and complexity. And like that's crazy.
It's like nobody told them that they have 68,000 people.
It's really crazy how challenging a market it actually is relative to its size. When you share like a relativity of like the cities that it's actually comparable against.
That and of course you've got the Maine bug born with it. You married another Maine bug. You're in the bug business, so you power through. And you've kind of retrofitted that pier into an icon, right? I mean, it's now looks like it was the original Luke's Lobster pier when Luke's Lobsters in 1840. I mean, you get the feeling that it belonged there for 1,000 years. Did that pier start your vertical integration story, or were you already on it and the pier is just a beautiful kind of wrapper for it, metaphor for it?
Yeah, so we actually the first time we were doing business in Maine was back in 2012 when we actually opened a seafood processing facility, and that was out of Saco. So that's when we became a real employer and investor in the state, and so that happened 3-4 years after opening Luke's. But Portland Pier was a commitment to fortifying the working waterfront. So that pier itself, when we picked it up, it had gone through 3 owners in 3 years. It had a total lack of any type of CapEx. There was a pickup truck that had fallen through the pier. All of the fishermen had left because it was no longer tenable to park or berth. There was no buyer on the pier, so there was no purpose to transact there. And so the first thing we did was we rebuilt the pier. We rebuilt the floats and the access to the working waterfront, and we rebuilt the buy station so that we could offer a commercial incentive to fishermen to come back, best in harbor buyer. And then we went to the landlord and we said, and the city, and this is where the city was a great partner for us, was like, hey, these fishermen don't get parking and berthing for $400 a month in Portland without some type of commitment, economic commitment to drive a return on investment for somebody who owns an asset like this. These piers are really expensive to maintain, and to offer that type of subsidized access to the working waterfront, like you got to have a different economic model. And so we then petitioned to staying within the working waterfront, like square footage compliance that they have, petition to put a restaurant out there. And it's been the model that's been needed to sustain.
Interesting. So the pier and the buyer came before the restaurant?
It did.
Ha.
Yep. And so in that element, like what we're able to do is find somebody who would buy and invest in the actual real estate based off the business model of making money on our sales that we could generate in the restaurant. So it's a percentage of sales occupancy deal. And that in itself is enough.
Now everybody's in it together. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
We just touched 3 things, right? This retail thing, and then there's the processing. and then there's the actual buying. One of Maine's problems is just the raw materials goes out and somebody else is making layer upon layer of profit on it. The wood turns into timber, the trees turn into wood, which turns into timber, but the timber then gets used elsewhere. The lobsters go out live. Nobody's making Luke's Lobster's delicious restaurant or supermarket ready stuff, consumer packaged goods stuff. You sort of turned a raw material legacy sector into at least a prototype of another economic complex, right? There's actual layers of value added before it goes out to the world. Was that following your nose once? Hey, I want to get it cheaper, this or that, or was your dream that sort of? Did you start with the end in mind, or did you follow your nose?
It's a really great question. I mean, I started as a lobster roll maker that really didn't know anything about the restaurant business, but knew a lot about the seafood business. I grew up on the working waterfront. I grew up in my dad's production facilities. He was the very first licensed lobster processor in the state of Maine. So like my commitment to Luke's Lobster out of the gate, my value proposition was offering the best quality product at the best price. And I didn't really know anything about running a restaurant. So to me, like the hero, the star of our show has always been the lobster. And as we've grown the business, we've just kind of recreated a lot of the elements that either my family was doing or knew how to do in the steps of vertical integration. I grew up, my dad used to own lobster pounds in Friendship. And I have memories of like taking tugboats out to these lobster pounds where they would put lobsters away in July, let them harden up and sell them in the off season when they were hard shells. And he sold that. And so I grew up on wharfs and working waterfront and then in production facilities. And so I had kind of elements of experience of all of these like parts of the vertical integration, the wharfs, the buy stations, the production facilities. And as we grew Luke's, we kind of realized that in order to control quality, we had an opportunity to kind of establish at least deep relationships or make financial commitments along the supply chain to maintain quality as we grew. And, that's been hard. It's a really capital intensive way to grow the business. And in some ways it makes sense. In some ways it doesn't, but it comes back to just like what I have a commitment towards and an affinity for is the Maine fishing community, and where we've been able to add value there along the way. I've been, really passionate and persistent about doing.
You were kind of born into, at least not quite born, but your dad took the first, what I would call sort of economic multiplier turn on lobsters, and you saw that growing up, right? So you go from lobster to lobster meat in the course of your dad's experience.
And 100%, I was born into it. That's totally reasonable.
Well, that's one layer. Your dad wasn't making consumer packaged goods at Whole Foods with a logo and a national brand.
Well, that was part of the underpinning of why Luke's. So in 2009, he was making truckloads of lobster meat and burying it in the freezer because there was no market for it. You're selling lobster meat for $14 a pound back then to whoever would buy it. There was no national, there was really no market for.
It's like the poor kelp people now. Like, hey, I got this organic kelp. Yeah, okay. Well, someday.
You got to build the market, and the market didn't really exist. And I'm looking there thinking like, hey, people in New York could get a lobster roll for $14 even during the height of a recession. And we could make, 20, 25% margins on this. This would be a win-win for everybody. And that was like the element of how Dad and I teaming up, at least out of the gate, made a lot of sense.
What is the supermarket part of this feeling like for you? This is new, right? This idea of, because boy, that changes your economic model, right? Anti-cyclical, you can work in shifts. I mean, what's it been like, both in terms of finding demand, but also manufacturing something that we think of as, barely not alive a minute ago to something that's, if not shelf stable, at least freezer stable?
Yeah. Learning the consumer packaged good business, the CPG business, has been like drinking out of a fire hose all over again. It's a totally different business than the restaurant business. All we're really doing is sharing a protein across those two channels. And so we're a couple years into it. We're learning quickly. We're trying to fail as efficiently and fast as we can. Um, like everything from the right portion size, the right messaging hierarchy, the right value proposition, um, it's all stuff that we're learning very, very quickly.
Do you get all the way to the finished product in Maine, in Saco?
Half of them, and then half of them we're working with co-packers as we kind of do the R&D process to figure out, what we should be selling, because there isn't a lot of with lobster value added products. It's not like you're going to, some incumbent and just trying to do better. Like, we've got to create shelf space. We got to create market space for
Yeah.
a lobster value added product. It's just, there's no comp for a lobster mac and cheese, a lobster ravioli, a lobster bisque, lobster kind of.
What's moving off the plate? What's moving off the shelf? Potatoes au gratin. Yeah. Hopefully not potatoes, because the Mainers need the potato au gratin. So why half? Which did you start here and say, now I need to balance out my buying, or was it too big a pain to run a production facility in Saco? I mean, Saco I think of as a gourmetish town to do industrial work, but maybe I'm not getting off the road far enough.
Saco's a good town to do business in. They've been very supportive. I would just say there's just, like, for a lobster ravioli, there's just an incredible amount of CapEx that goes into creating a product like that affordably. So why not partner with a co-packer that.
So there's somebody who just has that industrial kitchen and they run it, and you'd never stand up enough. So you're kind of doing the prototype, as it were, or maybe you're I was talking to Peter Del Greco at Maine and Company about, what I was like, what are you most excited about getting built in Maine? And he said, redundant short cycle industrial capacity. It's the best place, the cheapest place in the world to build the best product in the world, if it also needs to be a 1-day drive from 100 million people. If you want to build it cheaper, there's other places, but not, and never have a supply chain breakdown to 100 million people. Do you therefore have Saco not just as a test kitchen, but as a supply chain reliability thing? Is he onto something there in your experience of this?
Our economic model in the restaurants is that, we're in 13 different states, and often the real estate footprint is small because it's really expensive. We could be anywhere from $250 to $400 a square foot per year. Some of these are huge rents. So, in a lot of ways, in order to justify and validate our economic model, we need kind of a commissary type model, distribution model.
Hub and spoke, you do yeah.
Yep.
Got it. What have you learned? Like, you mentioned, boy, it would be nice if Portland had more of an underdoggy, hungry energy for people building there. What else is the upside that you see for Maine? I mean, Michael Porter or any kind of political economist would say adding value multipliers on top of raw materials that come in Maine is what we got to make into a superpower. And you've done it at least 2 turns, right? There's lobsters into processing, into finished goods, either restaurant or supermarket. Are there other places that you feel like that's where you'd say, boy, somebody ought to?
Yeah, I think there are examples of that kind of all throughout even our own supply chain. I'll call out a company called Marin, Marin, and that's the glyco protein company that's taking glycoproteins from lobsters and making healing creams.
Okay.
It's a major upcycle, major market potential type product, and that's a Maine-based business that there's no co-packing capacity for a business like that in Maine. They've got to go out of state as it is now for that type of production.
But that's another example where there could be another turn on that model if there was.
100%. and I know they'd love to do business in Maine. They're good Maine people that went to University of Maine and stayed in Maine, and so it is a for them that's a huge part of who they are. But that capacity is not here. I think the other thing that's shifting too is, and it's actually really helpful nowadays, is we've got a couple senior level positions open that, or as we're adding capacity to the leadership team, and like Maine is a major recruiting tool right now.
The lazy Luke moving to Cape to raise the baby story.
It's happening all over again. And so like people want to be here. And that when you get that flywheel of human capital that wants to be here, it perpetuates some of the problems that we have, which is like a housing crisis for America's first job, right? Like we still haven't figured that stuff out. But to have human capital here, you definitely need it in order to grow industry, and you can start to feel that shift where people can have really great quality of life and they can earn here. And I think that that's like a example of a tipping point.
I remember as we built out our operation, my old company in Belfast. Once we got to a couple hundred people, we needed leadership, real leadership. And what was really interesting, I was like, Jesus, how's this going to go? Um, and we were shocked to see superstars from Belfast High School or Rockland or Maine, who basically, like you and others, sort of, left to get the American dream train going, to get the salaries and the big promotion opportunities, because they just weren't here. And all of a sudden, you show up with a real, full benefits, full career type of opening, and they're back. They're waiting for the chance to be here, and some sacrifice, well, I'll do quality of life instead of income. But if you offer both, holy mackerel, it seems like we'll have a line around the block, assuming we could maybe get them a house.
Yeah, it's we're hiring right now for a vice president of financial planning and analysis, and um, we've had hundreds of applicants, and there's probably like 10 to 15 of them that have like almost identical stories of, I would love to get home and work for Portland Company, and it's like it's I think Ty will go to that type of candidate, but we're not going to hiring one of them, not 15 of them.
But if we multiply that playbook.
Yep. Yep.
And obviously we'll have to figure out how there's a place for them to live, and whether the taxes would be massively worse than anywhere else. I don't think we have to be like zero, because it's sort of worth it to live here, to be a little, if you have a small state, you've got to pay for the fixed costs over a smaller number of people, but just don't punch them in the nose like Portland regulations. I'll do a little lifting, but don't punch me in the nose. What about other species inside of Luke's? So, Luke's chowder. If there was an aquaculture market that grew fish that allowed you to get more species also native from Maine, would that be an obvious add-on for you, or is it really got to be lobster to work in your brand?
No, we're diversifying species. We've got a great firm commitment to sourcing only from sustainable resources. So that certainly would include farm raised either fish or aquaculture. But it's just got to go through the filter of what we deem as a sustainably managed and resourced. I think that Maine needs more of that. The analogy I always use is like, so in my world, I've got a production facility, and the production facility's got a certain amount of capacity. The same is true for every single commercial fisherman. They got a boat. That boat's got a mortgage. It's got an insurance bill, and it's got a staff, a crew, and they got 12 months of overhead. So they got 12 months of capacity, and we need a more diversified playbook at the shore to utilize that capacity.
Yeah.
To sustain that fisherman.
Where you work with, a fair number of these guys. I've noticed a slight migration in, my buddy John Jordan, who's right on, not on your wharf, but right next door, and a big senior sort of statewide influencer in lobster. A slight migration in the resistance to other species playing a role in Maine as sort of some of these low yield years come along. It's like, geez, what's our plan B? Are you seeing an openness to diversifying by the guys who own the boats?
I think 100%. None of the stuff is combative. It's all accretive. The reality is that the commercial fisherman is one of the, like, by DNA, is one of the most resilient types on the planet, right? So
Sure.
if you give them an opportunity to compete, it doesn't matter what that looks like, whether it's going out and fishing in January, or farming from their vessel in July.
Yeah.
So it's just about competing and making money, and being able to be their own sole proprietor. So the resistance around change is not, it's almost never from the fishermen. It's more from the markets and the regulation.
Interesting. I had heard years and years ago, we don't want these fish farms, they're in our way, and I'm thinking, what if you owned them, buddy? This could be plan B for you, or at least some diversification, but maybe that's evolving anyway. We have talked a little bit about the one area where it seems like we need, obviously, housing, willingness to diversify amongst some of the more traditional industry players. Is there a single thing, maybe we'll take the restaurant, a single change that you witnessed that you said, boy, you guys are, if you did this one thing differently, I mean, obviously it's probably a long sort of spaghetti handshake of 1,000 little interlocking things, but is there one thing that stood out to you as you think back, boy, I wish Maine would, or Portland would, do that differently?
I don't know if I've got a great answer for you here, but my answer is that, like, Maine has some resources, some trade groups, some support, but it's, like, incredibly fragmented. So trying to figure out your way through, like, even in the lobster industry, there's probably like 15 advocacy nonprofit profit related groups. They kind of all have their own little niche, and it's like, unless you know the leadership of them and what they're, like, focused on for their 3-year plan, it's really hard to kind of know what each is angling to,
What they're driving at. Yeah. I used to say, we're so happy that it's such a safe place for small business to stay small, and ownership to stay close to the hands that do the work. But if there was a Lobster Corporation of America, you can bet Noah wouldn't have shut down the shut down the lobster lines, But instead, all these going, what the hell's going on? And there isn't some sort of consolidated long-term sort of corporate resource fighting. So they can get buffeted in a way that a corporation might not. Be good to figure out how to do a better job protecting that.
That's a great example. I mean, through all of that whale mess, we had an incredible amount of people yelling at each other and an incredible amount of inefficiency, and none of it was centered around any form of data. It was all conjecture.
Starting maybe with Noah.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, you're fighting finger pointing with finger pointing, not here are the facts. Let's have the facts decide the case.
Luke Holden, Cape Elizabeth legend, now national icon, ambassador for Maine and its economic destiny, taking our raw materials and adding cycles of value to them to the max and selling that to the world. Thank you for coming on this Maine For Keeps podcast, and I wish you global domination of the most delicious thing you can put in your mouth.
Thank you for that. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for tuning in to Maine For Keeps. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on social media, click and share with your friends, or get on to mainforkeeps.com. If you have ideas for new content or podcast guests, Or if you'd like to give us some money to support the effort, be sure to click and send. We're at team@mainforkeeps.com, and I'm at jb@mainforkeeps.com. Thanks. See you soon.